So today we're going to cover Citrix User Group, or Citrix User Experience. We're going to talk about direct workload, Enlightened data transport, and local app access. My name is Wendy Gay. I'm a senior sales engineer. I've worked with Citrix technology for many years. I'm also a pre-sales engineering manager, and I'm a Citrix CTA. And I'm joined here by Gavin today.
Hey everybody, Gavin Connolly here. I am a Citrix pre-sales engineer specialist. I've been working with Citrix for over 3.5 years now. I started my journey in support and then moved to a pre-sales role. I'm very excited for this session here today. Thanks, Wendy.
Great. Move the deck, Gavin.
Oh, yep.
Brilliant. So when we talk about improving user experience with Citrix Cloud Service, and I love our naming conventions and how we like to change them. When we talk about direct workload convention, we're talking about NLS, which is Network Location Services. So Gavin's going to deep dive into that, how to set it up, how to configure it, and he has a lovely demo of it at the end. I'm going to then talk about Enlightened data transport. I'm aware Enlightened data transport is nothing new when we talk about on-prem environments, but we're going to talk about how you set it up, the system requirements when you're using gateway service. And that's the new tech preview that we were talking about. And we're going to talk about, again, how we set that up, the demo, etc. And then Gavin is going to talk about local app access with Workspace app as well, and how you can configure that, how you set it up. And we have a really nice little demo to show you on how you can do that also. So we'll dive straight into it. We'll talk about direct workload connections first.
Perfect, thanks Wendy, great stuff. So yeah, today we're going to talk about direct workload connections. When we talk about kind of location aware connectivity, you guys are probably already familiar with Storefront Beacons as a concept. So that was the ability to have an external beacon and an internal beacon and do a test based on the user's location of what beacon they were able to hit. And then route the traffic appropriately based on that feedback. So I'm just building that out. So when we talk about, so that allowed us to kind of hit both external and internal beacon and then kind of route that traffic appropriately. Today we're introducing the concept of direct workload connections using network location service. This gives us the ability to bypass the gateway service when we're on the internal network. This, of course, is going to optimize the internal traffic for that user. It's going to give them a much faster and better experience because it means that they don't have to go all the way out to the internet to come back in to that internal network. We also will have the ability to have a network location per logical network segment as well. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So at the top there, we have our external user on the workspace. They have to hit the gateway service over the internet and then get directed into that VDA resource, which is sitting internally inside the network. If an internal user was sitting inside the network without network location service, they too have to go out to that gateway service and then get pushed back down to that VDA resource. This, of course, is not ideal. It's going to take them longer. It's a slower connection time. Instead, we have the magic of introducing a network location service, which means when we configure and enable this, we can go directly via that user and hit straight to the VDA resource. This is, of course, bypassing that gateway service, saving them time and that long connection load times, and making it an overall better experience for them. So how do we do this? So we use the external IP addresses of the VDA to determine whether the user are internal or external to the company network and route the internal users direct to the VDAs. We do have the requirement on there that when we're configuring this, TLS 1.2 must be enabled in PowerShell when we're configuring the location service in PowerShell. And we can do this, we can force PowerShell to use TLS 1.2 by using that below command. One thing to point out here is that if your users want to use and use the Citrix Workspace app for HTML5, we do need to enable TLS on those VDAs to make sure that those internal network connections are able to connect. If we don't have that TLS enabled, those app and desktop launches are routed through the gateway when they use that HTML5. So with that, we have the ability to do Workspace app connections through SSL and TLS in 7.6 or later. So your VDA 7.6 or later. And I've just included a nice little link there for how to configure that TLS on those VDAs. So let's jump kind of straight into the configuration of how this direct workload connections work. So to begin with, Citrix has provided a sample PowerShell script that we can get off the GitHub link here. And the great thing about this is that we don't really need to make any modifications to this, and we can kind of configure the network location service as is using that. So the first step is we need to log into our Citrix Cloud admin account, and we need to generate API access. We need a secure client ID and secret. So we go to our identity and access management section of the admin portal. We go to our API access. One thing to do is to take a note of the customer ID that you see there, because we're going to need that later when we're running the script in PowerShell. We give it a name, so a test, or a test name, or whatever you want to name that appropriately. And we generate that ID and secret. So we can copy that, or we can download it if we want to keep it kind of stored for later use, or just copy them directly out. And next of all, then we're ready to jump into PowerShell. Just build out this slide. So the first thing that we need to do is, of course, we navigate to wherever we host that PowerShell script, and we import that module. So we run the import module nls.psn1 command, and once that's successful, then we can populate that script with our attributes here. So we add in our client ID that we've gotten from the cloud, our customer ID, and our client secret. So those three, and just be careful with the customer ID, because I've seen customers get tripped up on that. I've seen users get tripped up when they're generating their customer ID, putting in the wrong thing. So just be aware, and we found that on that API page that I showed you before. So next, what we need to do then is do a connect-NLS, and we need to populate that with those three attributes that we've configured before. Once we push them in and they're correct and accepted, we'll see there that we get the green successfully authenticated to Citrix Cloud. We now may begin to use NLS to configure by configuring new-NLS site. So that's what we're going to do. So here then we need to configure that new NLS site. For that, we need to have our external IP range. In this example here, though, because I was just testing in my own lab, I've just used one VDA. And if I use one VDA, I just put in the IP address /32. It's also a requirement to put in the longitude and latitude of that VDA location. So we give it a name and we give it a tag. We populate it with that external IP address and the longitude and latitude. Once that is processed, then we can check that by doing a get-NLS site. And once we do that, that should populate back any NLS sites that you have configured. So we can have multiple NLS sites if we need to. And that's the way that we can verify what NLS sites are currently set up in that account. To check that we have done this correctly, there's a quick and handy way, and Wendy's going to show you this in more detail later when she looks at EDT, but we have the ability to go into our director area, our monitoring tab inside the Citrix Cloud, go into the launch session of that VDA and go to the details, and we should be able to see the protocol. And if we see that running over UDP, then we know that the configuration is successful. If not, it would have been running over TCP. Then finally, the time may come, or if you're just testing this, where you want to remove the NLS site. So we do that by entering that command. One thing to note there is that there's two ways to do that. If you just have one site and you're just doing a test, you can just use the top get-NLS site, remove NLS site, or we can use that get-NLS site bracket N bracket, where N being the location on the list, the number on the list where that location sits. So if you have 3 sites and you want to remove the first one, it's 0, the second one is 1, third one is 2, etc. So you just populate what site you want to remove in that component. So let's take a quick look at the admin experience again. I obviously have gone through that there, but I just had a quick video put together just to show you how you do it real quick and how quick and easy it is to get that done. So we've logged into our Citrix Cloud account. As I mentioned, we go to the API access. I've noted down my customer ID at the top there. I create this new NLS test client here, and this will generate my ID and secret that I need. So I've downloaded this because I want to use it later on too, and I will copy it twice as well. So next we need to import that PowerShell script. So this is the PowerShell script there now. Again, it's quite handy because we don't really need to make any changes to that, and you can see everything there. Just run down through it just to kind of show what that looks like. And now we're back over to our PowerShell to add in these parameters. So first we import that script by doing that import command. You will see then that we have the option to run that command once. Then we want to populate it with our attributes that we've pulled from the Citrix Cloud Admin Portal. Now we want to use those attributes in that connection. So we use that connect-NLS command. Once we see the green, we're all good then to configure an NLS site. So for this, I have just named it E2 EVC demo, and I've gotten the IP address of one of the VDAs in my lab. I've added in the longitude and latitude, and I configured that. Once you see that there, that it's populated, you know that it's been successfully added. And then if I get my get NLS sites, it will list all the locations that I have. Finally, then we go to remove that location. Again, I just have the one, so I've just used that top command that I showed you before. I don't need to specify which one in the list. It'll give you the option, are you sure you want to remove it? And I'm just going to say yes to all. So once we've done that, then of course we're optimizing that internal user experience because they no longer have to go outside the internal network to come back in to reach them VDAs. This is obviously optimizing that that connection time and makes for an overall better user experience. So with that, I will go ahead and pass that across to Wendy, who's now going to talk to you about that Enlightened data transport.
Thanks, Gavin. Great, yes, so we want to talk about Enlightened data transport, and we want to talk about it with regards to Citrix Cloud and the gateway service. As I said already, it's been available since 7.12, I think, on-prem, but it's now available, as I say, at tech preview. I think it's just about to be released, but I'm not sure, on Citrix Cloud with the gateway service. We're going to deep dive then and have some detail on adaptive transport. But before we go into too much detail, we'll take a step back and we'll have a look at HDX. So when we think about HDX, when we think about HDX and what do we want to get, we want to make sure we get a really rich, high definition user experience for all our users that are accessing our Citrix environments, and we want to make sure they can make use and utilize things like smart cards, scanners, tablets that have pens, etc. As part of their experience via Citrix, so they have all the capabilities and requirements that they want. Brilliant. And if we take a look at adaptive display, and I saw a fantastic video on this morning, and when we talk about adaptive display, we're talking about making sure that the end users have as close to a PC-like experience when that remote display is delivered to them via Citrix. And when you think of a screen and what's delivered via a screen, what we really need to think about is how that screen is made up. So when that screen is being remoted across to that user, there's got lots of different types of content. And when we have a look in the green, for example, we have video, 3D graphics. If we look at what's in red, we can see that they're image-based graphics. So they're straight flat images, not moving. And then we have blue text, which is our text-based images. And when we look at what we can do with those, in the past we had no choice. We picked a way of optimizing that screen overall, and we had to do that. With the adaptive display, the protocol is going to pick the best way of adapting and encoding that screen to give the best user experience. When we look at, there we go. And when we look at the video, we've got H.264. That's the most efficient for video and 3D graphic workloads, but it has a higher CPU. So you want to use it where you want to use it, but you don't want to use it for everything. And that is important when we're talking about server density as well, especially in cloud. We want to make sure that we're using as much CPU as we need, but not too much. And we want to make sure we have really good scalability and server scalability. Then when we talk about JPEG and images, we're going to use thin wire. It's more efficient for static images, and it's going to make sure we keep that CPU low. And then finally, we've got blue, which is our text. And for our text, we want to make sure it's sharp and crisp and avoid that horrible blur where you're not having that sharp edges around your text. So we want to make sure that we use lossless for that. And if we look at the ICA channel and protocol, if we look at it at an application layer, layer 7, we're talking about ICA, and inside of ICA then we've got all of these internal virtual channels. The internal virtual channels include things like drivers, printing, keyboard mapping, all of the things that we're used to being able to do and turn on and turn off in an ICA channel. Then we have things like Teams, Skype, audio, which is UDP anyway, and then we have our adaptive display channels, which is thin wire, H.264, and our DCR. And when we look at it then and we drill it down to a transport layer, which is layer 4, this is about how we're going to get our remoted desktop and that PC-like experience from A to B, and how our users are going to actually get that detail. So we encapsulate the ICA protocol inside of TCP in order to get that information and that detail across to our end users. I think I'll click next. Oh, apologies, I want to go back one slide there. Let's hope that clicks. Would you click that one?
Is that right, Wendy?
Yeah, it's missing one bit for me. Never mind. And on top of that, then what we have is adaptive transport, which sits on top of TCP.
Next. Yeah,
that might be next. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, sorry, go back to this.
You're all right. No worries. The problem, apologies all. The problem with TCP, as we all know, is it gets more latent as the distance increases between A to B. So while it's an extremely reliable protocol, we have a problem with not being able to utilize the entire pipe. Because it's reliable, it has these checks in place that will throttle back when needed. We want to make sure we can utilize most efficiently as possible that bandwidth that's available. So now I'll go on. Thanks, Gavin. And what we've done then is Citrix has then its own proprietary protocol called adaptive transport, which is going to work on TCP and EDT, which is utilizing UDP. And UDP will allow us to make better use and more efficient use of the bandwidth available for us. So when we take that a little bit further and go on, we can see that EDT will work over UDP, and it will also fall back to TCP if it needs to. So it's going to decide what is the best protocol to use based on the network conditions that the client is connecting from. So it's going to make sure it always gives you EDT over UDP where possible, and if not, it will fail back to TCP, always ensuring that we get that good user experience for our users. So let's have a look at now how we set it up. And it's really easy to set up with Citrix Cloud. There's a couple of things you need to be aware of from a system requirements perspective. We need to have the right version of VDA, so 1912 or above. We need to make sure we've got the Rendevous protocol enabled and working. So for anyone who hasn't come across Rendevous protocol yet, it's basically allowing us to skip the cloud connector and talk directly to the gateway service. The cloud connector is no longer part of that path, so it's connecting directly to that gateway service. We need to make sure we have the right ports open, so we need to have UDP port 443, TCP 443, and they need to be open outbound from the VDA to the internet. We need to have the adaptive transport policy enabled, and I'm going to show you all of this stuff now in a minute, enabled via Citrix policy. And while EDT is supported on all of the supported Windows version, Citrix recommends that EDT through a gateway service only is used with VDAs running Windows 10 or 1912 due to limitations with the OS. And then in order to run the connection in parallel, you need to have the right version of Workspace app as well. And we'll talk about that in a minute as we show the flow of process, how the connection works. Just move it on there, Gav. Great. So if we think about Rendevous protocol, what do we need to have that to work? Because obviously it's a prerequisite for EDT. So let's have a look at what does Rendevous protocol need. When we look at Rendevous protocol, excuse me now, just get a drink. Excuse me. Rendevous protocol needs again 1912 or later. We need to enable the Rendevous protocol and policy, as we said. The cloud connector must obtain the VDA's FQDN. So this is important, and when that's brokering the session. So I'm going to show you how we do that in our lab. We're going to use PowerShell commands. We're going to connect to our site via PowerShell, and we're going to set that setting up. And then I'm going to show you how we tested it and how we see that it works. So just go forward. I also pulled this document and put the detail in the link below to talk about what Rendevous and EDT needs. I just thought it would be handy for people to have. So again, you know, we've got UDP 1494, 2598, as well as 443. So let's look at how we set it up. So the first thing you need to do via PowerShell is load your PowerShell commandlets, and then you're going to type in get XD authentication. So this is going to give you a prompt to log into Citrix Cloud, and this is how you're going to be able to make those changes nice and easily. Once you've logged in, the first thing I always do is get broker service. So what's going on with broker site? What's going on with broker site? Have I enabled? And because we work in a lab environment, we're constantly changing these configurations, so I always need to check it before I start. And DNS resolution enabled is set to false. So I want to change that. I'm going to change that to true. So how do I do that? I'm going to make sure I do set broker site -DNS resolution enabled is true. So once I hit that command, I do get broker site again. And once I do is get broker site again, I can see that that is now set to true. So I'm good to go for those system requirements. So now if we look at the Citrix policies that we need to set up. So we go into our policies and we have a look. You'll see I've got 2 policies set up here to do what I need to do. The Rendevous protocol is set to allow HDX connections bypass the cloud connector and directly connect to the gateway service. With session reliability, along with client auto connect, allows us to automatically reconnect to those sessions after recovering from network disruptions. And then we obviously need, most importantly, the HDX transport, which uses EDT over the adaptive transport. So I've set those policies up, and what I've done is then I'm obviously going to apply them to my delivery group that I'm going to use for my testing. And when you have a look here, you'll see this, and this caught me, I have to say, this is something that caught me when I was doing the testing. Be very careful with the syntax you use and make sure there's no spaces, etc. when you're adding this cipher suite order. It's very specific, and I had 1 extra space in here and it would not work. So just make sure you have all the details correctly put in here. And when you go in here, it's literally a group policy setting. You go into your group policy, you open up policies, network, SSL configuration, and in there is a setting for your cipher suite order. Open that up and pop in the detail here, and you're good to go. I then assign that to my OU that I was using for my testing. And how do you verify that that's set up properly? And I have a few, there's a few different ways you can find out, is it working, is it not working? So the first thing you can do, and I'll show you this in a video in a minute when I make a connection, is you can type from PowerShell on the VDA that you're connecting to. So don't do this on your local machine, you must do this from inside the VDA. Type CTX session-v for verbose, and you will see the transport protocol shows UDP, DTLS, CGP, ICA. So that's using adaptive transport, DTLS, and it's using Rendevous as well. So that's set up correctly and that's working just as we want. There's another way to check it. As I said, there's a few ways to check if this is behaving or not. You can also go into your session in Director in Cloud, go into Monitor, highlight your user session, click session details up on the top right hand corner, and you will see I've highlighted in there that the protocol being used for this session is UDP. So I know I'm no longer using TCP, I am making use of adaptive transport, and I am using UDP instead. And there is even another way to check this as well. You can go into your Workspace client and check your connection status. And in there, you will see that you're using DTLS as well. And this is also another bit of information that I've put on the right-hand side of the screen. And it's great for troubleshooting because you can see exactly, am I using Rendevous? Am I not using Rendevous? And it will give you different details if you are. It'll use UDP, DTLS, CGP, and ICA if everything is fantastic. You're using Rendevous, you're using EDT, all is good. If you're using TCP, so you've fallen back to TCP, it'll say SSL, CGP, and ICA. And if you're not using Rendevous at all, it's going to say TCP, CGP, and ICA. So it's just handy for troubleshooting, you know, where the process is breaking down. And again, this is just the flow of the connection type. So what happens? You're on your desktop, you're using your Workspace app, and you click on an application. So when you click on an application, it's going to attempt both EDT and TCP in parallel. And when it connects to, it's going to check, is that EDT connection successful? Yes, it is. Then great, your session is connected, you're off, you're running, you're at the races. If it fails, it's going to attempt to use TCP with Rendevous. So that was option 2 that we saw on the slide beforehand. Can it use TCP? Can it use Rendevous? Yes, it can. Connection successful, session is going to be established. If it cannot, it will then move back and it will attempt to use TCP in a non-Rendevous connection. So now we're back through the cloud connector, which is what we used to do always before Rendevous was available. If that works, connection is successful. If it doesn't work, then the connection will fail altogether. So I think it's just nice to get an idea and an understanding of how that process will work. Just click next there, Gavin. Brilliant. So here is a little quick video I did literally a few minutes ago, super fast for this session. And you'll see I created a delivery group called E2EV2. And I created 2 policies. And my 2 policies are basically what we've agreed. We've got our Rendevous and we've got our session reliability, and our adaptive transport is set up. I made sure I sign them to my delivery group, which is E2EV2, so I can check that that's done. And then I went back into my lab. This is the lab I have in Azure. And I go into my policies, I go to my admin, I go to network, and I go into SSL configuration settings. So when I have a look at SSL configuration settings, as I said, we enable that Cyber Suite order and just be very careful about gaps, spaces, anything that's not correct there. Once I have that done, I then go ahead and I launch that E2EV2 desktop. Now, apologies for my bad video editing skills because I had 2 screens here, so it's gone. I had to drag it over. And when it launches this E2EV2, I want to check straight away, is it using UDP or is it not? So once it launches, I now need to resize it. I've got WEM on this box as well, so I'm making use of Workspace Environment Manager, which is going to help me as well. Squeeze more users onto boxes and have better scalability. Yeah, that's really important when we're talking about cloud. I have to just stretch this desktop a little bit. And again, I want to open up command prompt. This is a WVD image, by the way. So this is a WVD image sitting in Azure. And when I type in my CTX session-v for verbose, I can see that I'm using, as expected, EDT for my gateway service connection. So that's just a quick run through of EDT. It's a few policies to set up and a nice easy few ways to check that it's working. And then I've put in some links at the end that will assist anyone if they're wanting to configure it, set it up, or I've put the Podio site in for that tech preview as well. So that's EDT in a nutshell with gateway service. I'm going to hand back to Gavin now to talk about local app access.
That's perfect. Thanks, Wendy. Great info there.
No worries.
Sorry, I'm muting myself instead of skipping the slide forward. Okay, great stuff. So finally then jumping across to talk about local app access. So local app access is currently in tech preview, and I think it's something that's really cool. I think it's one of it's one of the favorites of mine that's come out over the last kind of 3 to 6 months. It gives us the ability to pull in those applications installed on the physical machine into the Citrix workspace. That way our end users are able to truly consume all their resources through that single pane of glass, whether that be their virtual applications, their web applications, SaaS applications, mobile applications, and now even their locally installed applications as well. Obviously, some users, will prefer to just kind of consume the virtual applications in the workspace, but this gives a really nice option for users who spend most of their day in the workspace. You can pull everything into that single pane of glass for them. So what it gives us the ability to do is it allows us to make those local applications discoverable and gives the users the options to select up to 20 applications today and pull those into the workspace. There is kind of some things to consider with that. These applications are pulled from these 4 specific folders. So you have your start menu under the current user and desktop under the current user, and then you have your start menu under the program data, Microsoft Windows, and desktop under users public. Now, when we populate and pull in those local apps from that physical machine, we do that in this order, in the order that I've listed them. So we do have a limitation of only discovering 128 apps, local apps. So if you have more than that many local apps, I'm not sure, I'm probably hitting close to it now myself, but maybe I'm an outlier on that one. But you need to make sure that the applications that they're going to want to pull in are going to be, in those higher folders. If for example, this had 128 and then, app 130 is sitting here, they're not going to be able to see that. As I mentioned before, you can save or add up to 20 applications from local into the workspace, and that will grow over time. Up to 100 is what they're hoping for. That's on the roadmap, and as this kind of goes more into the generally available territory, hoping that ability will grow. And again, I think this is a really kind of nice feature. It's just a nice touch. It's not going to change the world by any means, but again, it just makes for that better user experience, more flexibility in how users want to consume their applications. So let's look at how we configure this. So firstly, we need to configure a registry key and push that out to those end machines, those physical client machines. Obviously, this is probably going to be in the in the concept of a managed machine, something that the business owns rather than a bring your own device. So we need to create a DWORD registry key called enable local app discovery and have that set to 1. It's different where that's set based on a 32-bit machine or a 64-bit machine. So you can see that the difference is in software. Then for the 32-bit, it's under Citrix and ICA client. And then for the 64-bit, it's in that WOW 6432 node, and then Citrix and ICA client. So just be aware of that change if you're kind of scratching your head going, hey, where's that folder sitting? So with that, then we can create a group policy object for this. And I have a bit of a demo video that I'll show you in a while on how I've done that. Once we set that, we can enable that as true. And then we have the ability to kind of do a green list, red list on this one. So we have the ability that if you wanted to limit the applications that you want to enable those users to pull into that workspace. A good application that I think of on this one is something like a Zoom. Zoom today, we can optimize it with Citrix and give that great experience in a virtual desktop, but as of today, we can't optimize it as an application. So you might want to have locally installed Zoom and pull that in. So we can green list those applications here and give that list, and the detail is there. So let me just take a look at quick whip around this video where I've configured this in the lab environment. I've pulled this in really last minute, so the branding is a little bit dated. So what we do, we start with, we get those ADMX files that Citrix have provided, and we put these into our group policy definitions folder on our domain controller. Then we come into and we have to put them in 2 different locations, and that's all detailed in the documentation. So there's 2 different files, and we pull them across. Then we can create a new object in our Active Directory, and we can make sure that the VDAs are in that object. Again, I've just put one in here just because it's in the lab and I'm just testing it out here. Once we have that, then we can go into our group policy management. find that policy and create that new GPO. So again, a good example of that, I had one with a customer where they wanted to deliver Zoom through that Citrix Workspace as an application rather than a desktop, due to kind of the ability, not having the ability to optimize that as a virtual application. We kind of use this local app access to pull the locally installed version of Zoom in, and again, the end user, you know, unless they're kind of savvy to Citrix, they're not really knowing where they're consuming each of these apps, if it's a web, if it's a SaaS, if it's a local, if it's a virtual, so they get that kind of same end user experience. So you can see here, we edit that group policy, we enable that local app access. Again, you see there that we have the ability to add in those green listed applications. So if that green list applications is blank, it will just allow everything. If you start populating it, then it will only allow the applications that you specify. So then we can go back and we can check our registry setting, make sure that that's set to 1 on that local endpoint. And once we see that, then we're good to go. And let's flip over to the end user experience. So the end user logs into the workspace, and for the first time, they're prompted with an alert if it's their first time logging in. And we can, as you can see, we have the option of pulling in all those different local applications. So I've just selected kind of WordPad and snipping tool just as an example, and I pull that in. You can see once they're in, I'm consuming, there's SaaS applications in here, there's virtual applications, and now I have my local applications as well. And you can see I launched the snipping tool, it's local, so it launches like the local app, and I can use it straight away. And it's responsive as if I was just using it on the local machine, because I am. So, and then in the top right corner, I'll just rewind that there for a second just to catch that last bit at the end. I think it's really cool. We can go in and we have the option to manage local apps then in our context menu in that top right corner, and we can then kind of make any changes if we decide we need to add in more apps, take more away, and so on. And again, it's giving that end user the option to pull in what they want and leave out anything that they don't. So that was just a very quick whistle-stop tour of local app access. Again, it's in tech preview currently, and I think it's one of those cool ones that, you know, people might have missed if they weren't paying attention. So
Great.
With that, then, Wendy, I'll hand back over to you for the last piece.
No, great. Just want to say, 1, thanks for your time. 2, apologies we couldn't deliver the deck that we really would love to deliver, and hopefully we'll be able to do it next time. And hopefully some of that information was useful. We'll share this deck. You have our Twitter handles, so if you want to get in touch, give us a shout if you have any additional questions. So thanks for having us.